For a second, no one moved. No one breathed. I just sat there, frozen in my gray suit, clutching the folder I had brought, the one with the signed contract he'd clearly forgotten about, the one that named me as the rightful successor. Not Brooke. But I didn't speak. Not yet. Because I knew when I did, the entire room would stop pretending. And that's exactly what happened. In front of the entire boardroom, all the shareholders, executives, and partners, my father stood up, pointed at me, and said, "She's just a bastard. She will never carry this company's name." Then he turned to Brooke, kissed her forehead, and announced her as the next CEO of Blake Holdings. That moment changed everything, but not in the way he expected. The Blake Holdings boardroom always intimidated me, even after 10 years. 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Charlotte's skyline, and that massive oval table made from a single piece of mahogany. Every time I walked in, I felt the weight of legacy press down on my shoulders. That morning was different. I arrived early, precisely at 7:15 a.m., knowing the shareholders' meeting wouldn't start until 8:30. I wanted to settle my nerves, review my notes one final time, and mentally prepare for what was supposed to be the most important day of my career. I placed my leather portfolio on the table, right at my usual spot, 3 seats to the right of the head chair, Raymond's chair. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed down my gray Armani suit, the most expensive piece of clothing I owned. I'd bought it specifically for today. Bit early, aren't you, Claire? I turned to see Linda Parsons, the company's chief legal counsel, standing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted, taking a grateful sip. "Too much riding on today." Linda smiled knowingly. "He's making the right choice. You know that, right? This company wouldn't have survived 2020 without you." I nodded but said nothing. The truth was, I didn't know if Raymond would follow through. Despite the contract he'd signed 3 months ago, despite his verbal assurances, despite everything, Raymond Blake was unpredictable. And I was, after all, the daughter he never publicly acknowledged. By 8:15, the room began filling with board members, shareholders, and executive team members. I greeted each with a professional smile, despite the knot tightening in my stomach. From the corner of my eye, I watched Margaret, Raymond's wife of 20 years, enter with her Prada handbag and perpetual look of disdain. Behind her walked Brooke, their 26-year-old daughter, texting furiously on her phone, her bright red designer suit making her impossible to miss. "Claire." Margaret nodded curtly, not bothering to extend her hand. "Margaret," I responded evenly. "Lovely to see you." Brooke didn't even acknowledge me. She never did. To her, I was just the operations person, the numbers girl who worked too much. She had no idea we shared the same father. That knowledge was limited to Raymond, his lawyer, and me. Not even Margaret knew the full truth. At exactly 8:30, Raymond Blake entered the room. At 68, he still commanded attention. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a navy suit with the Blake Holdings pin on his lapel. Everyone stood. It was an unspoken rule. "Let's get started," he announced, settling into his chair. The meeting proceeded through the usual quarterly updates, CFO's report, marketing's projections, legal considerations. I presented the operations overview, highlighting our successful restructuring of the debt portfolio that had saved the company $12 million this quarter alone. Then came the moment. Raymond stood up, straightened his tie, and cleared his throat. "As you all know, I've been at the helm of Blake Holdings for 32 years. It's time to discuss succession." The room fell silent. I felt several eyes shift toward me. It wasn't a secret that I'd been groomed for leadership, COO for 3 years, handling every major crisis, streamlining operations across 5 divisions. I'd earned this. I'd worked for it. Raymond continued, "Leadership requires more than just skill. It requires vision, legacy, family." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. "Some of you assumed Claire would take over," he said, his eyes avoiding mine. "But I want to make one thing clear." He pointed directly at me. The gesture felt like a physical blow. "Claire is not my daughter. She's a bastard from my past, and I want someone who truly carries the Blake name." Gasps rippled through the room. My face burned. The coffee in my stomach threatened to come back up. "So I'm proud to announce our new CEO." He turned to Brooke, who was now standing, beaming. "My daughter, Brooke Langford." The silence that followed lasted only seconds before uncertain applause began. Brooke stepped forward, hugging her father, while Margaret looked triumphant. I remained perfectly still, my expression carefully blank despite the hurricane inside me. Everyone was watching for my reaction. The woman who'd been publicly humiliated, the bastard who'd been put in her place. I felt a hand on my shoulder, Linda's, squeezing gently in support. That small gesture gave me strength. Slowly, deliberately, I opened my portfolio and removed a blue folder. Inside was the document Raymond had signed 12 weeks ago, naming me as his successor, outlining the transition of power, the equity split, all legally binding and witnessed by Linda herself. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Before we proceed with congratulations, I said calmly, there's a legal matter we need to address. Raymond's head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing. This isn't the time for, he began. I believe it is exactly the time, I interrupted, something I'd never done before, especially when it concerns the leadership of a publicly traded company worth billions. I slid copies of the contract down both sides of the table, ensuring every board member received one. This is a legally binding succession agreement, signed by Raymond Blake on March 17th of this year, naming me as CEO effective upon his retirement. It includes specific clauses regarding equity transition and leadership structure. Raymond's face drained of color. Brooke looked confused, then angry. Margaret's mouth opened in shock. This can't be legal, Margaret hissed. Linda stood. I witnessed the signing myself. It's completely valid and enforceable. The boardroom erupted in chaos. Questions flew, accusations mounted, legal implications were raised. Through it all, I remained seated, watching as Raymond's carefully constructed narrative collapsed around him. When the noise reached its peak, I simply gathered my things and stood. I suggest we adjourn to review these documents properly, I said. I'll be in my office if the board has questions. As I walked toward the door, I heard Raymond's desperate voice behind me. Claire, wait. I turned, meeting his eyes directly for the first time that day. For 10 years, I waited, I said quietly. I'm done waiting. I walked out, shoulders back, head high, leaving behind a room full of shocked faces and the father who had just publicly disowned me. The real battle was just beginning. My office felt like a sanctuary after the boardroom ambush. I closed the door, set down my portfolio, and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of weakness. 30 seconds to let my hands shake, to feel the burn of tears behind my eyes, to acknowledge the pit in my stomach. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. At 30, I straightened my spine, wiped beneath my eyes, and reached for my phone. I had prepared for this possibility. I hadn't expected the public humiliation, being called a bastard in front of the entire executive team, but I had known Raymond might renege on our agreement. I texted my attorney, James, contract revealed, proceeding as discussed. The response came immediately. On it, stay calm, document everything. A soft knock on my door made me look up. Linda entered without waiting for permission, closing the door firmly behind her. That was the most professional evisceration I've ever witnessed, she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. I allowed myself a small smile. I learned from the best. What you didn't learn from Raymond was his penchant for self-destruction. Linda sat down across from me. He's in there scrambling, trying to claim the contract was preliminary, non-binding. We both know it isn't. Yes, but the board is confused, shocked. He's their founder, their golden boy for 3 decades. You're going to need to fight. I nodded, pulling out my laptop. I've been preparing this fight since I received my mother's letter. The letter. I hadn't thought about it in years, but suddenly I could see it clearly. My mother's delicate handwriting on her personal stationery, the pages slightly yellowed from where she'd stored them in her bedside drawer. I was 29 when she died of breast cancer. In the days after her funeral, as I sorted through her belongings in our modest Greensboro home, I found an envelope addressed to me with the instruction, "Open when I'm gone." Inside was the truth I'd never known. Raymond Blake, the billionaire founder of Blake Holdings, whose name I'd seen in business magazines, was my biological father. They'd had an affair when my mother worked briefly as an administrative assistant at his first office. When she told him she was pregnant, he paid her to disappear, to raise me quietly away from Charlotte, away from his growing empire and the society wife he'd just married. But my mother had been smarter than he expected. She'd negotiated a clause that if I ever worked for Blake Holdings, I would be given fair consideration for advancement based on merit alone. And she'd kept the original agreement, signed and notarized, all those years. I never planned to work for Blake Holdings. It was coincidence, or perhaps fate, that led me there after business school. I'd applied to dozens of investment firms, and Blake Holdings offered the best opportunity. I didn't know then that I was walking into my father's company. For 5 years, I worked without Raymond ever recognizing me. I changed my appearance significantly from my college years, cut my long brown hair into a professional bob, wore contacts instead of glasses, lost the freshman 15 and then some. I became Claire Monroe, operations specialist, financial strategist, crisis manager. It wasn't until I saved the company millions during a botched merger that Raymond really noticed me. He promoted me to director, then VP, then COO, all without knowing I was his daughter. I never told him. I wanted to earn everything on merit. Then came the day he called me into his office and said, "There's something about you, Claire. Something familiar." I remember freezing, wondering if he'd figured it out. "You remind me of myself," he continued. "The way you think, the way you solve problems. I've been watching you for years." That night, I stared at my mother's letter for hours, debating whether to reveal the truth. I decided against it. Let him promote me because he thought I was like him, not because I was his blood. A month later, he called me back to his office. "I've been thinking about succession," he said. "I want it to be you." My heart raced. "What about Brooke?" I asked carefully. He waved dismissively. "Brooke is all style, no substance. She couldn't run this company if her life depended on it. You're the one, Claire. You've earned this." I asked him to put it in writing. He agreed without hesitation, and we set a meeting with Linda to draft the agreement. It was only after signing that I told him. I pulled out my mother's letter and slid it across his desk. His face as he read it, I'll never forget that mix of shock, recognition, and then something darker. "Calculation. Ellen's daughter," he whispered, looking up at me with new eyes. "All this time?" "All this time," I confirmed. "But that changes nothing about my capabilities or what I've earned." He nodded slowly. "No, it doesn't." Then, almost to himself, "Margaret can never know." I understood his concern. His wife had a prenuptial agreement that gave her substantial control if he ever had children outside their marriage. The contract we'd just signed would remain our secret until the public announcement. Or so I thought. Linda's voice pulled me back to the present. "The board's called an emergency session for tomorrow. They want legal counsel present. Both sides." "Both sides?" "Raymond's bringing in external counsel. I'll represent the company's interests, but you need your own." "Lawyer?" I nodded. "James is standing by." Linda studied me with concern. "Claire, this will get ugly. Raymond has a lot to lose, not just the company, but his marriage. If Margaret learns the truth—" "I didn't ask for any of this," I said quietly. "I just wanted what I earned." "I know." Linda stood to leave. "For what it's worth, you handled yourself brilliantly in there. Not everyone could maintain that level of dignity after being called what he called you." After Linda left, I called my assistant. "Thomas, I need you to pull together all the major crisis interventions I've led in the past 5 years. Every restructuring plan, every acquisition strategy, complete with outcomes and financial impacts." "Everything?" Thomas sounded overwhelmed. "Everything. I need to remind the board exactly who's been keeping this company afloat." As I hung up, my phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. "You'll regret humiliating our family. B. Brooke." Of course. I put down my phone without responding and turned to my computer. The battle lines were drawn. Now I needed to prepare for war, a war I never wanted, but one I was determined to win. Not for revenge, for justice. When I entered the executive dining room the next morning, conversations halted mid-sentence. Eyes darted toward me, then quickly away. The room held most of our senior leadership, the people I'd worked alongside for years, solved problems with, celebrated wins with, and suddenly, they didn't know how to act around me. I selected my usual table by the window, ordered black coffee, and opened my laptop as if it were any normal day. I refused to hide, refused to show weakness. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up to see Marcus Chen, our chief technology officer, standing with his tray. Marcus had always been fair, professional. One of the few executives who judged based on results, not politics. "Please," I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat down and stirred his oatmeal thoughtfully. "Quite a meeting yesterday." "That's one way to put it," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. For what it's worth, he said quietly. Most of us are shocked by how Raymond handled things. Whatever the legal outcome, the way he spoke to you was unacceptable. I felt a rush of gratitude for this small act of decency. Thank you, Marcus. The tech division's quarterly numbers, he said, sliding a folder across the table. I thought you might want to review them before the board session. It was a professional courtesy, but also a statement. He was still treating me as COO, still acknowledging my position. I accepted the folder with a nod. As we discussed the latest server upgrade, I noticed Brooke enter with 2 board members, laughing loudly. She wore another designer suit, bright blue this time, with heels that clicked aggressively against the marble floor. When she spotted me, her laughter cut off abruptly. She whispered something to her companions, then strode directly to our table. Marcus, she smiled brightly, completely ignoring me. I'd love your input on the technology strategy going forward. Perhaps we could meet later today? Before Marcus could respond, I closed my laptop and stood. He's all yours, Brooke. I have a meeting to prepare for. As I walked past her, she grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging slightly into my skin. This isn't over, she whispered. I looked pointedly at her hand until she released me. You're right, I replied calmly. It's just beginning. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the smaller conference room. A deliberate choice, I suspected, to avoid the scene of yesterday's confrontation. When I arrived with James, my attorney, Raymond was already there with Margaret and a silver-haired man I recognized as Stanley Whitmore, one of Charlotte's most expensive corporate lawyers. Linda sat at the middle of the table, her position symbolizing her neutrality as company counsel. The board members filed in silently, faces solemn. Richard Dawson, our longest-serving board member, called the meeting to order. We're here to address the succession agreement presented yesterday by Claire Monroe, which appears to conflict with Raymond Blake's announced intention to name Brooke Langford as CEO. Stanley Whitmore spoke first. My client acknowledges discussing succession with Ms. Monroe, but the document in question was merely a draft, never intended as binding. Mr. Blake has the right to change his mind about leadership transitions. James responded immediately. The agreement bears Mr. Blake's signature, was properly witnessed, and contains no conditional language whatsoever. It explicitly states that Ms. Monroe will assume the position of CEO upon Mr. Blake's retirement or by January of next year, whichever comes first. The argument continued, growing increasingly technical. I watched Raymond, who refused to meet my eyes. His face was flushed, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. There's another matter, Stanley finally said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. Mr. Blake has concerns about Ms. Monroe's personal motivations. I tensed, knowing what was coming. It appears Ms. Monroe may have engineered this situation. She recently claimed to be Mr. Blake's biological daughter, a claim he categorically denies. The room fell silent. I felt every eye turn to me. That's a lie, I said clearly. I never engineered anything. Raymond has known I'm his daughter since the day he signed the succession agreement. Preposterous, Margaret cut in, her voice shrill. Raymond would have told me. I opened my folder and removed my mother's letter, sliding it toward Linda. This is a letter from my late mother, Ellen Monroe, explaining the circumstances of my birth. Raymond confirmed its accuracy the day he signed the succession agreement. Raymond's face paled. That proves nothing, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Linda read the letter silently, then passed it to Richard Dawson. If what this letter states is accurate, Linda said carefully, it raises significant questions about disclosure obligations to shareholders. This is blackmail, Margaret hissed, her perfect composure cracking. She's using this absurd claim to force her way into leadership. I've never wanted anything but what I earned, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I've worked for this company for 10 years. I've led us through crises, restructured divisions, saved millions. My record speaks for itself. James interjected, my client has never publicly claimed to be Raymond Blake's daughter. She has never sought financial compensation for her upbringing. The succession agreement stands on its own merits, regardless of parentage. The debate continued for another hour. Questions about DNA testing were raised and dismissed, legally irrelevant to the succession agreement itself. Arguments about company bylaws, shareholder interests, and leadership qualifications flew back and forth. Finally, Richard Dawson called for a short recess. As the board members filed out, Raymond approached me. Claire, he said quietly, we need to talk. Privately. I glanced at James, who nodded slightly. 5 minutes, I agreed, following Raymond to a small side office. Once alone, his demeanor changed completely. Gone was the hostile CEO. In his place stood an aging man, suddenly looking all of his 68 years. "You never needed to do this," he said, his voice weary. "You could have come to me privately. We could have worked something out. Like we worked out. The succession agreement?" I asked. "The one you publicly denied yesterday while calling me a bastard in front of the entire executive team?" He flinched. I panicked. Margaret was suspicious. She'd been questioning why I spent so much time mentoring you. Brooke had been pressuring me about leadership. I made a mistake. "A mistake," I repeated flatly. "Is that what you call public humiliation?" "I'll make it right," he promised. "I'll announce that there was a misunderstanding. You'll still be COO. When things settle down, we can revisit succession in a year or two." I stared at him, incredulous. "You think I want to continue working for you after what you did? After you denied me not once, but twice? What do you want then?" he demanded, frustration bleeding through. "Money? A settlement?" "I want what I earned," I said simply. "The position you promised me, in writing. The opportunity to lead this company that I've helped build. And if I fight you on this, if I take it to court," I met his gaze directly, "then everything comes out. Your affair with my mother, the agreement you signed to keep her quiet, the succession contract, all of it, public record." He paled, understanding the implications for his marriage, his reputation. "You're blackmailing me," he whispered. "No," I corrected him. "I'm holding you to your word. There's a difference." Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Linda poked her head in. "The board's reconvening." Back in the conference room, Richard Dawson called the meeting to order. "The board has consulted with legal counsel and reviewed all documentation. Our conclusion is that the succession agreement signed by Raymond Blake is legally binding." Raymond's shoulders slumped. Margaret's face hardened into a mask of fury. "However," Richard continued, "given the complex nature of this situation and potential impact on company stability, we propose a modified transition plan." I listened as he outlined their compromise. I would immediately assume the role of CEO-elect. Raymond would remain as chairman for 6 months to ensure a smooth transition. A press release would go out announcing the planned succession, with no mention of my biological connection to Raymond. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. I nodded my agreement. "One final condition," Richard added. "Both parties agree to maintain professional decorum throughout the transition. No public accusations, no media leaks, no disruption to company operations." As the meeting adjourned, I gathered my papers, feeling oddly hollow. I'd won, technically, but there was no triumph in watching Raymond's defeated posture, or Margaret's tear-streaked face as she hurried from the room. On my way out, Brooke blocked my path. "You think, you've won," she spat, "but you'll never be a Blake. Never." I looked at her. This young woman who'd had every advantage, every opportunity, handed to her without effort. For a moment, I pitied her. "I never wanted to be a Blake," I told her honestly. "I just wanted to be respected for my work." As I walked away, I felt lighter somehow. The battle wasn't over. The transition would be challenging. The relationship strained. But for the first time since that horrible moment in the boardroom, I felt certain I'd made the right choice. Not for revenge, for justice. The press release went out the next morning. Blake Holdings announces CEO succession plan. My phone immediately exploded with congratulatory messages from colleagues, former classmates, industry contacts. The Charlotte Business Journal requested an interview. My alma mater called about a speaking engagement. Overnight, I had become a success story. The dedicated COO ascending to the top position after years of proven leadership. The narrative was clean, professional, exactly as the board had crafted it. No one outside that boardroom knew the ugly truth. No one knew about Raymond's public denouncement or the biological connection he'd tried to deny. The company's carefully constructed press statement portrayed a planned, amicable transition, nothing like the reality. I sat in my office, scrolling through the online coverage, when Thomas knocked on my door. "Your 10 o'clock is here," he announced, "and the IT department needs access to set up your new office." My new office. The CEO suite on the top floor, Raymond's domain for 3 decades. The thought made my stomach clench. "Tell them I'll keep my current office for now," I decided. We can revisit the move after the transition is complete. Thomas nodded, understanding what I didn't say. I wasn't ready to claim Raymond's space, to physically displace him while wounds were still fresh. Also, Thomas added hesitantly, Ms. Langford Brooke has requested a meeting with you tomorrow. That surprised me. Did she say why? No, but she seemed not angry, maybe resigned. I considered declining, then reconsidered. Schedule her for tomorrow afternoon. And Thomas, I'd appreciate it if you'd sit in and take notes. He smiled slightly, recognizing the protective measure. Of course. My 10 o'clock was with Marcus Chen and the leadership team to discuss our upcoming technology rollout. As they filed into my office, I noticed a subtle shift in their demeanor. More deference, more formality. Yesterday, I had been their peer. Today, I was their boss. The realization was both gratifying and uncomfortable. Before we start, I said, I want to acknowledge that this transition has been abrupt. I know you all have relationships with Raymond that span years, even decades. I respect that, and I don't expect loyalties to shift overnight. A few surprised glances circulated. They hadn't expected this directness. What I do expect is professionalism and your continued commitment to this company's success. Judge me on my decisions, my leadership, my results, not on boardroom politics or rumors you might hear. Marcus nodded appreciatively. Transparency has always been your strong suit, Claire. The meeting proceeded smoothly after that, focused entirely on business. For 2 hours, we were just executives doing our jobs, the personal drama momentarily set aside. As the team departed, Linda lingered behind. Nicely handled, she said. You're already shifting the narrative from drama to business. That's the goal, I replied. The sooner we move past the succession fight, the better for everyone. Linda perched on the edge of my desk. Raymond's cleaning out his office today. Margaret's with him. I tried to picture it. Raymond Blake boxing up 30 years of professional life, Margaret supervising with her typical efficiency. How is he? Subdued. The board meeting hit him hard. She paused. He asked if you'd stop by before he leaves. The request surprised me. Did he say why? No, but I got the impression he wants to clear the air. Maybe even apologize. I doubted that. Raymond Blake didn't apologize. Not sincerely, not without an angle. But refusing would appear petty, ungenerous in victory. I'll go up before lunch, I decided. Raymond's corner office occupied the prime. Location on the top floor. West-facing windows capturing both the city skyline and the sunset. As I approached, I saw Margaret exit with a small box of personal items. She spotted me and froze. For a moment, I thought she might ignore me completely. Instead, she walked directly toward me, stopping uncomfortably close. You may have the title, she said, her voice low and controlled. But you will never have the respect he earned. The board may have ruled in your favor, but everyone knows what this really is. Opportunism dressed up as merit. I held my ground. I'm sorry you see it that way, Margaret. He built this company from nothing, she continued, emotion bleeding into her words. 30 years of his life, his vision, and you took it with a piece of paper and a convenient claim of paternity. I earned my position, I replied evenly, and Raymond signed that paper willingly, knowing exactly who I was. Her expression faltered slightly. He made a mistake. One moment of sentimentality that you exploited. Is that what he told you? I asked, genuinely curious. That he didn't know what he was signing. He told me enough. Her chin lifted. Our attorneys are reviewing all law. Options. This isn't over. I sighed, suddenly tired of the conflict. Margaret, I have no desire to destroy your family or Raymond's legacy. I just want to do the job I've been preparing for. The job he promised me. Save your reasonableness for the board, she snapped. I know exactly what you're doing. With that, she strode toward the elevator, shoulders rigid with dignity. I took a deep breath and knocked on Raymond's door. Come in, his voice called. The office looked strange. Half-empty bookshelves, bare patches on walls where art had hung, desk cleared of the usual clutter. Raymond stood by the window, hands in pockets, staring out at the city. You wanted to see me? I said, remaining near the door. He turned, and I was struck by how different he looked. Not just older, but diminished somehow. The commanding presence that had dominated boardrooms for decades seemed to have receded. Yes, he said quietly. I thought we should talk. Without lawyers. Without the board. I moved further into the room but didn't sit. I just ran into Margaret. She seems to think this is still a battle to be fought. He shook his head. Margaret is protective of me, of our family. Name. And you? What do you think this is? He considered the question seriously. A reckoning, perhaps, for choices made long ago. I waited, saying nothing. Your mother, he continued, was extraordinary, smart, principled. I didn't deserve her loyalty. This wasn't what I had expected. Reminiscence about my mother. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked, he admitted. The company was just taking off. Margaret and I had been married less than a year. I convinced myself that paying her to disappear was the right thing for everyone. Including me? I asked quietly. The child who grew up without a father? He had the grace to look ashamed. I was wrong, about many things. I crossed my arms, protecting myself from the unexpected vulnerability in his voice. Why did you sign the succession agreement if you were going to publicly deny it? Deny me? I meant it when I signed it, he said. You are the right choice for CEO, the best choice. I recognized your abilities long before I knew you were my daughter. Then why? He sighed heavily. Fear. Weakness. Margaret had become suspicious about why I favored you. Brooke kept pressing for a leadership role. The board was asking questions about succession planning. I convinced myself that blood should take precedence over a contract. You called me a bastard, I said, the words still raw, in front of everyone. His face crumpled slightly. There's no excuse for that. None. It was cruel and false, and I'm deeply sorry. The apology, sincere, unqualified, caught me off guard. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he continued. I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I regret what I did and I accept the board's decision. I studied him carefully, looking for the manipulation, the angle. I found only weariness and regret. What happens now? I asked. I stepped back. You lead. He gestured to the empty office. It's yours now. And what about us? The fact that I'm your daughter? His eyes met mine, directly for the first time. That's your decision. I forfeited any right to a relationship when I denied you. Twice. The honesty of his response surprised me. I had expected excuses, justifications, perhaps even threats. Not this quiet acceptance of consequences. I don't know what I want, I admitted. Right now, I need to focus on the company. He nodded. Of course. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. This belonged to your grandfather, my father. His first investment contract framed. It hung in my first office when the company was just 3 employees in a rented space. He held it out to me. It should be yours now. I hesitated, then accepted the box without opening it. Thank you. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. Claire? I paused at the door. You're going to be better at this than I ever was. I didn't respond. Couldn't. The complexity of emotions, anger, vindication, a strange grief for what might have been, left me speechless. Instead, I simply nodded and walked out, closing the door softly behind me. The first month as CEO-elect passed in a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and careful navigation of company politics. I maintained my usual schedule. First in the office, last to leave, but everything else had changed. Executive assistants stood when I entered rooms. Conversations halted mid-sentence as I passed. Even the cafeteria staff seemed nervous serving me coffee. The Claire effect, Thomas joked one morning, noticing how people scattered as we walked through the marketing department. You'd think you breathed fire. I prefer respect to fear, I replied, though I understood the dynamic at play. No one knew exactly what had happened in that boardroom, but everyone sensed the power shift. Raymond, their founder, their patriarch, had been dethroned, and I was the usurper, however legitimate my claim. My meeting with Brooke had been surprisingly civil. She'd arrived alone, composed, dressed in a subdued navy suit rather than her usual flashy attire. I won't pretend to be happy about this, she'd said bluntly. I believed that position was mine. Based on what? I'd asked, genuinely curious. She'd looked startled by the direct question. I'm a Blake. Dad always said the company would stay in the family. And what were your plans for Blake Holdings? What vision did you have? Her hesitation told me everything. I would have maintained Dad's approach. His strategies worked for 30 years. The business landscape has changed dramatically since your father founded this company, I pointed out. What worked then won't necessarily work now. She'd frowned, defensive. I have an MBA? So do thousands of others. What makes you qualified to run a multi-billion-dollar investment firm? What's your track record? Her cheeks had flushed with anger. I don't have to prove myself to you. No, I'd agreed, but you would have had to prove yourself to the board, the shareholders, the executive team, and every employee whose livelihood depends on this company's success. That had silenced her. For perhaps the first time, she was confronting the reality of executive leadership, not just the title and prestige, but the responsibility. What do you want from me? She'd finally asked. Professional courtesy, I'd replied. You don't have to like me. You don't have to support me. But I expect you to respect the board's decision and not undermine this company's stability. She'd considered this, then nodded curtly. Fine. Is that all? No, I'd said. I also want to offer you something. A real role here, if you want it. Not CEO, not handed to you, but a position where you could learn, contribute, and yes, maybe even prove yourself. Her eyes had widened in surprise. Why would you do that? Because despite everything, we're connected, and because talent shouldn't be wasted. She'd left without accepting or rejecting my offer, but the conversation had accomplished what I'd hoped, a tentative truce. Now, 4 weeks later, I sat in my office reviewing the quarterly projections when Marcus knocked on my door. Got a minute? He asked, uncharacteristically hesitant. Of course. He closed the door behind him. Another unusual move. There's something you should know. Raymond's been meeting with Westford Capital. I set down my pen. Westford Capital was our largest competitor, a firm we'd battled for clients and market share for years. Meeting how? Socially? Marcus shook his head. 3 separate meetings in the past 2 weeks. Highly confidential, but my cousin works in their IT department. Mentioned seeing Raymond in their executive suite. The implications were troubling. Raymond knew our strategies, our vulnerabilities, our client relationships. If he was sharing insider information. Any idea what they're discussing? I asked. Nothing concrete, but there are rumors about a potential acquisition offer. I leaned back, processing this. They want to buy Blake Holdings? Or at least a controlling interest. Marcus paused. With Raymond's support, they might sway enough shareholders to force a vote. This was the scenario. I'd feared from the beginning, Raymond using his influence to undermine my leadership, potentially even force me out. Thank you for telling me, I said. Let's keep this between us for now. After Marcus left, I called Linda. I need to know Raymond's current shareholding position and any recent stock movements among major stakeholders. Linda didn't ask why. I'll have the information this afternoon. I spent the next hours reviewing our bylaws, our shareholder agreements, our defensive positions against hostile takeovers. By the time Linda arrived with the data, I had 3 contingency plans drafted. Raymond controls 28% of voting shares, she reported, down from 35% last quarter. He's selling? Small batches. Nothing that would trigger disclosure requirements. But yes, he's reducing his position. I studied the shareholder list. Any patterns in who's buying? Several shell companies have increased their holdings. Could be Westford operating through proxies. I paced the office, thinking through implications. If they get to 51%, they could force a merger vote, Linda finished, or replace the board with their own people. Who then replace me? I concluded. Linda nodded grimly. It's a classic corporate raid strategy. Use Raymond's insider knowledge and influence. Quietly accumulate shares, then strike once they have control. I stopped pacing. We need to call an emergency board meeting, today. 3 hours later, I stood before the board presenting the evidence and my proposed countermeasures. Some looked skeptical, others alarmed. This is all circumstantial, Richard Dawson pointed out. We have no proof Raymond is actively working with Westford. The timing is suspicious, another board member argued, coming right after the leadership change. Regardless of Raymond's involvement, I said, the threat is real. Westford has been acquiring our shares through proxies. Their intentions can't be good for Blake Holdings. After heated debate, the board approved my defensive strategy, a temporary poison pill provision that would make any hostile takeover prohibitively expensive, plus authorization to pursue a white knight investor if necessary. As the meeting adjourned, Richard pulled me aside. You realize what this means? If Raymond is indeed working with Westford, he's actively trying to sabotage the company he built. Or, he's trying to sabotage me, I replied. Perhaps the company is just collateral damage. Richard shook his head sadly. I've known Raymond for 25 years. I never thought he'd go this far. Pride is a powerful motivator, I said. So is wounded ego. Back in my office, I drafted communications for our largest clients, assuring them of our stability and strategic direction. The last thing we needed was client flight amid takeover rumors. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Claire Monroe, I answered. It's Brooke. Her voice sounded strained. We need to talk, not at the office. My instinct was to refuse, suspecting a trap, but something in her tone made me reconsider. Where and when? Carter's Bistro, 7 tonight. Come alone. She hung up before I could respond. I debated calling James, my attorney, but decided against it. If Brooke had information about Raymond's plans, alienating her with legal caution might backfire. Carter's was a small, upscale restaurant in Myers Park, far enough from the financial district to avoid business crowds. I arrived at 6:55, deliberately early, and asked for a table with a clear view of the entrance. Brooke arrived at 7:10, looking harried. She wore jeans and a sweater, the most casual I'd ever seen her, and no makeup. Thanks for coming, she said, sliding into the booth. Your call seemed urgent. She glanced around nervously. It is. Dad's planning something bad. Westford Capital, I said. I know. Her eyes widened. How did you— Never mind. Yes, Westford. But it's worse than you think. He's not just helping them acquire shares. He's promising to deliver confidential client information, strategy documents, internal assessments. That's corporate espionage, I said, alarmed. It's illegal. He's not thinking clearly. For the first time, I saw genuine distress in Brooke's expression. He's obsessed with taking back control, with proving he's still relevant. Mom's encouraging him, telling him. He's defending the family legacy. Why are you telling me this? I asked directly. Why warn me? Brooke looked down at her untouched water glass. Because I've spent the past month thinking about what you said, about qualifications, about earning a position. She met my eyes. I may not like how things turned out, but I don't want to see Blake Holdings destroyed out of spite. What exactly is he planning? And when? They're moving fast. Westford's CEO is pushing for action before your poison pill provision takes effect. Dad's meeting their legal team tomorrow to hand over documents. My mind raced. Do you have proof? Something we could take to the board? She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. I recorded a conversation between Dad and Harris and Westford. It was at our house. During dinner. I wasn't supposed to be home, but I came back early. She pressed play. Raymond's voice filled the space between us, describing exactly how they could use privileged client information to force a merger. Harrison Westford's deeper voice responded with questions about regulatory concerns. They're planning to announce Friday, Brooke concluded, putting her phone away. Dad thinks the weekend will limit immediate market reaction, giving them time to secure more support. Why would you record this? I asked, still suspicious. Why turn against your father? She looked away, uncomfortable. After our meeting, I did some research about you, your background, your work at Blake Holdings. She paused, and I found Mom's records of the payments to your mother. I stiffened. What? Payments? Monthly transfers for 18 years, labeled Ellen Monroe Support. Mom kept meticulous records of everything Dad did that might compromise her position. The revelation stunned me. Margaret had known about me all along. The way Dad talked about you at that shareholders meeting, Brooke continued, calling you a bastard, acting like you were nothing to him. It was all for Mom's benefit, a performance to keep his marriage intact. I struggled to process this new information. And you decided to help me because I realized I've been lied to my entire life, she said with unexpected bitterness. Because the company deserves better than being sacrificed to my parents' dysfunctional marriage. And because, she hesitated, you were right about me not being qualified. Not yet, anyway. I studied her face, looking for deception, finding only conflicted honesty. What do you want in return? I asked. For this information. The offer you made before. A real position. A chance to learn the business properly. She straightened her shoulders. And protection from whatever fallout comes when you use that recording. I nodded slowly. I'll need a copy. Already sent it to your personal email, along with screenshots of Mom's record keeping. As we left the restaurant, Brooke paused on the sidewalk. I'm not doing this to be your sister, she said firmly. I don't know if I'll ever see you that way. I understand, I replied. Family is complicated. Business is cleaner, she agreed. So let's stick to that for now. We parted ways, temporary, allies against a common threat. I called Linda from the car, explaining what I'd learned. Then James, then Marcus. By midnight, our counter-strategy was in place. The trap was set. Now we just had to wait for Raymond to walk into it. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Linda asked, her normally composed face lined with concern. Once we start, there's no going back. We stood in the executive conference room early Friday morning, hours before the workday would begin. James sat at the table reviewing documents, while Marcus prepared the secure line to the SEC Enforcement Division. I'm certain, I replied. Raymond made his choice. Now he has to face the consequences. He's still your father, Linda said quietly. I met her gaze steadily. Biology doesn't excuse betrayal or criminal behavior. At precisely 8 a.m., Raymond strode into Blake Holdings as if he still owned it. Security had been instructed to let him pass, to direct him to the executive floor where he expected to meet with 2 Westford Capital representatives. Instead, he found me waiting in the conference room, alone. His confident expression faltered momentarily, then reset. Claire, this is unexpected. Is it? I gestured to the chair across from me. Please sit. His eyes narrowed with suspicion, but he complied. I have a meeting scheduled. With Westford Capital. I know. I opened a folder and slid a document across the table. They won't be joining us. He glanced at the paper, a printout of an email from Harris and Westford, canceling all dealings with Blake Holdings effective immediately. What did you do? He demanded, color rising in his face. I protected this company, I replied calmly. The company you were willing to sabotage out of pride. His hands clenched into fists on the table. You have no idea what you're talking about. I pressed a button on the conference phone. Play the recording, please. His own voice filled the room, discussing confidential client information, acquisition strategies, vulnerabilities that Westford could exploit, Harris and Westford's enthusiastic responses, the explicit plan to force a hostile takeover. Raymond's face drained of color. Where did you get that? Does it matter? I asked. What matters is that I have it, and so does our board. And as of 30 minutes ago, so does the Securities and Exchange Commission. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. You're bluffing. The SEC has opened a formal investigation, I continued as if he hadn't spoken. They're particularly interested in the insider trading implications of your stock sales ahead of the planned takeover announcement. You bitch, he hissed, mask of civility finally dropping. You ungrateful, manipulative. Careful, Raymond, I interrupted. Everything in this room is being recorded. He fell silent, chest heaving with anger. Here's what happens next, I said, maintaining my composure. You will resign from the board, effective immediately. You will sign a non-compete agreement. You will surrender all remaining Blake Holdings shares to a blind trust. And you will issue a public statement supporting my leadership. Or what? He challenged. Or I release the full recording to the media, and I testify against you in the SEC investigation. And I ensure that the Blake name becomes synonymous with corporate corruption. His eyes burned with hatred. You would destroy everything? Even your own position? I would protect what matters. The company, our clients, our employees. I leaned forward. You taught me that, ironically. The business comes first. For a long moment, he said nothing, seemingly wrestling with rage and calculation. Margaret will never accept this, he finally said. Margaret has her own problems, I replied. The board didn't appreciate learning she knew about your biological daughter all along, yet participated in that public charade at the shareholders meeting. His expression shifted, surprised. How did you— She kept records, Raymond, of everything, including the payments to my mother. Something changed in his face then, a flicker of defeat, of recognition that he was outmaneuvered. The agreements are with legal counsel, I said, standing to signal our meeting was concluding. You have until noon to sign them. After that, the SEC takes the lead. As he turned to leave, shoulders. Slumped in defeat, I added, one more thing. He paused at the door. Brooke has accepted a position in our strategic development division. Real work, real responsibility. She starts Monday. His head snapped back toward me, shock evident. Brooke, she was part of this? She chose the company over family politics, I said simply. Something to think about. After he left, I sank back into my chair, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation finally dissipating. I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound weariness. Linda entered quietly, taking the seat Raymond had vacated. He's gone. Security escorted him out. And the papers? His attorney will deliver them signed by noon. She studied my face. Are you okay? I considered the question seriously. No, I didn't want it to end this way. You didn't start this, she reminded me. He did. I know, but escalating it to the SEC, forcing him out completely, I shook my head. Part of me wonders if there could have been another way. What would that have looked like? Letting him undermine you? Allowing him to damage the company out of spite? She was right, of course. Raymond had left me no choice. Still, the finality of our rupture, not just professional, but personal, felt heavier than I'd anticipated. What happens now? Linda asked. Now we rebuild, I said, straightening my shoulders. Stabilize client relationships. Reassure employees. Implement the strategic plan we've been developing. And Raymond? He made his choices. Now he lives with them. By afternoon, the news had spread through the company. Raymond Blake, founder and former CEO, had resigned from the board to pursue other interests. The statement released to the press was bland, corporate, with a perfunctory quote from Raymond supporting the continued success of Blake Holdings under its current leadership. No mention of the SEC investigation. No hint of the corporate espionage narrowly avoided. No acknowledgement of our biological connection. I spent the day in back-to-back meetings, reassuring nervous executives, answering careful questions from the board, preparing for the inevitable media inquiries. By 7 p.m., when the building had emptied, I finally allowed myself a moment alone. I stood at the window of my office, still my original office, not Raymond's grand corner suite, and watched. Charlotte's skyline transition from daylight to dusk. Lights flickered on in office buildings and apartments. Traffic flowed on the streets below. Life continued, indifferent to the corporate drama that had consumed my world. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find Brooke standing in the doorway, still in the casual clothes from our dinner meeting. I heard it's done, she said. He signed everything. I nodded. He did. She entered hesitantly, closing the door behind her. And the SEC? They've agreed not to pursue criminal charges as long as he complies with all terms of the separation agreement. His reputation will suffer, but he won't face prosecution. Relief flickered across her face. Thank you for that. I didn't do it for him, I clarified. A public scandal would hurt the company, hurt our clients. Still, she moved to stand beside me at the window. It could have been worse. We stood in silence for a moment, two women connected by blood, but separated by history, viewing the same cityscape from different perspectives. Mom called, Brooke finally said. She's leaving him. Said she's been planning it for years, just waiting for the right moment. I wasn't surprised. Margaret had always struck me as calculating, patient in her ambitions. She wanted me to choose sides, Brooke continued. Told me working here would be a betrayal of family loyalty. And what did you tell her? That I was tired of their games, that I wanted to build something for myself, not inherit it from a poisoned legacy. I glanced at her, seeing her differently. No longer the privileged princess, but a young woman struggling to define herself beyond her parents' shadow. Monday morning, I said. 8 a.m. orientation, business casual, no special treatment. She nodded, accepting the terms. I don't expect any. As she turned to leave, she paused. We're never going to be friends, are we? Probably not, I admitted. Too much history. But we could be colleagues, she suggested. Professional respect, if nothing else. I think we can manage that. After she left, I gathered my things and headed home, feeling the weight of the day, the week, the months of conflict settling into my bones. The battle was over. Raymond defeated. My position secured. Yet as I drove through the darkening city, I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, only a quiet certainty that I had done what was necessary. Not for revenge, but for justice. Not out of hatred, but out of responsibility to the company I had helped build. Raymond's words from our last real conversation echoed in my mind. You're going to be better at this than I ever was. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe he might have been right. 6 months passed. Winter gave way to spring, and Charlotte bloomed with dogwoods and azaleas. Blake Holdings flourished under my leadership, stock up 14%, new client acquisitions exceeding projections, employee retention at record highs. The boardroom drama that had consumed us half a year ago faded into corporate legend, whispered about but rarely discussed openly. I finally moved into the CEO's office, though I'd had it completely redesigned, warm woods replacing cold marble, comfortable seating areas instead of imposing furniture, glass walls rather than barriers. A physical manifestation of my leadership philosophy, accessible, transparent, but still commanding respect. On this particular April morning, I arrived early as usual, reviewing the quarterly reports before our 9 a.m. executive meeting. Thomas appeared with coffee and a small blue envelope. "This was hand-delivered for you," he said. Messenger said it was personal. I examined the envelope, high-quality stationery, my name handwritten in elegant script, no return address. I opened it carefully. Inside was a short note. "The Gardens at Davidson College. Saturday, 2 p.m. I have something that belongs to you. Ellen's friend." My heart stuttered. Ellen? My mother's name? Someone who knew her wanted to meet me. I set the note aside, focusing on the day's tasks, but it lingered in my thoughts. By Saturday, curiosity overcame caution. Davidson College's gardens were particularly beautiful in spring. Carefully tended beds of tulips and daffodils, mature trees just leafing out, quiet paths winding between academic buildings. I chose a bench near the main fountain, dressed casually in jeans and a light sweater, sunglasses concealing my surveillance of passing visitors. At precisely 2 p.m., an elderly woman approached. She walked with a cane, but moved with determination. Silver hair cut in a neat bob, wearing a floral blouse and navy slacks. The kind of elegant older woman who'd never lost her sense of style. "Claire Monroe?" she asked, stopping in front of my bench. I nodded, removing my sunglasses. "And you are?" "Catherine Davenport," she said, extending her hand. "I was your mother's closest friend." I shook her hand, processing this information. "My mother never mentioned you. Ellen was very private about certain things." Catherine settled beside me on the bench with a small sigh, especially after she left Charlotte. "You knew her? Here? Before Greensboro?" She nodded. "We worked together at First Charlotte Bank. That's where she met Raymond." I tensed slightly at his name. "You knew about their relationship." "I was the only one she told," Catherine confirmed. "Ellen wasn't the type for affairs, especially with married men. But Raymond," she paused, searching for words. "He could be very persuasive when he wanted something." "Why are you contacting me now?" I asked directly. Catherine reached into her handbag and withdrew a small leather-bound book. "Ellen gave me this before she left Charlotte, asked me to keep it safe, possibly forever, but then I saw your name in the business section. Claire Monroe, new CEO of Blake Holdings. Your mother's last name, your father's company. I knew it had to be you." She handed me the book. "She wanted you to have this if you ever learned the truth about your father." I accepted it carefully. A journal. The pages yellowed with age, my mother's distinctive handwriting filling the pages. "What is it?" "Her diary from that time," Catherine explained. "The real story. Not the version Raymond paid to keep quiet." My throat tightened. "I don't understand." "Ellen didn't take Raymond's money because she was greedy, Claire. She took it to protect you." I leafed through the journal, catching fragments of my mother's thoughts, her hopes, her fears. Protect me from what? Raymond threatened to destroy her, professionally, personally, if she didn't disappear. He had power, connections. She was 26, pregnant, alone. Catherine's eyes clouded with old anger. The agreement wasn't her idea. It was his insurance policy. I closed the journal, overwhelmed by this new perspective. Why didn't she tell me? She wanted you to form your own opinions, make your own choices. She was afraid that knowing the truth would set you on a path of revenge. Catherine smiled sadly. Ellen always believed living well was the best response to cruelty. We sat in silence for a moment, the fountain's gentle splashing the only sound between us. "There's something else," Catherine finally said. "Something not in the diary." I waited, sensing the weight of her unspoken words. Raymond came to see Ellen about a year before she died. This revelation stunned me. "What? Why?" "He'd been following your career from a distance, saw your graduation announcement in the university paper, realized you were working at his company." Catherine's voice softened. "He wanted to meet you properly." Ellen refused. "She kept us apart deliberately?" The thought stung, even after all this time. She made him promise to judge you solely on your merits if you ever crossed paths professionally. No favoritism, no acknowledgement of your connection, unless you discovered it. Independently. Catherine touched my hand gently. She wanted you to succeed on your own terms, not as Raymond Blake's secret daughter. The pieces suddenly aligned, Raymond's initial coolness toward me, his gradual recognition of my abilities, his complicated reaction when I finally showed him my mother's letter. He'd known all along. I don't know what to do with this information, I admitted. You don't have to do anything, Catherine replied. I just thought you deserved the complete truth. Your mother was extraordinary, principled, loving, stronger than anyone knew. I wanted you to have her words, her perspective. As we parted ways, Catherine hugged me impulsively. She would be so proud of you, Claire. Not just your success, your dignity, the way you've handled everything. That evening, I sat on my balcony and read my mother's journal from cover to cover. Her voice, thoughtful, occasionally wry, always honest, filled the pages. Her initial attraction to Raymond, her dismay upon discovering he was married, her determination to raise her child alone rather than become a secret mistress, her courage in facing down his threats and negotiating terms that would secure my future. One passage particularly struck me. I won't poison my child against their father. Hatred is too heavy a burden for a young heart to carry. Instead, I'll teach them integrity, perseverance, and the quiet power of living truthfully. Someday, if Claire ever encounters Raymond, she'll be strong enough to face him as an equal. Not as a victim, not as an adversary, but as her own complete self. I closed the journal, tears blurring my vision. My mother had given me more than life. She'd given me the freedom to become myself, unburdened by a history I wasn't ready to carry. Monday morning, I arrived at the office with new clarity. The past couldn't be changed, but the future remained unwritten. Blake Holdings, the company that bore my biological father's name but now flourished under my eye. Leadership represented not the end of a revenge story, but the beginning of a legacy I was creating on my own terms. As I stepped off the elevator, Brooke was waiting, tablet in hand. The Singapore team sent over the prospectus, she said, falling into step beside me. I've highlighted the concerns in Section 4. In 6 months, Brooke had surprised everyone, especially me, with her dedication and rapidly developing business acumen. Stripped of entitlement, given real responsibility, she'd revealed a sharp mind and genuine commitment. Let's review it together, I suggested. I have 30 minutes before the board call. In my office, we discussed the Singapore proposal, debating risk factors and growth potential. Our working relationship remained strictly professional, not warm, but respectful. The complicated family dynamics simmered beneath the surface, acknowledged but not central to our daily interactions. As our meeting concluded, Brooke hesitated. Have you heard from him? I didn't need to ask who she meant. No, not since the agreements were signed. You? Monthly dinners, very formal, very quiet. She gathered her materials. He sold the Charlotte house, moving to Hilton Head next month. With your mother? No. A flicker of sadness crossed her face. The divorce is almost final. Mom's in New York now. I nodded, unsurprised. How are you handling it all? The question seemed to catch her off guard. I'm adjusting. It's strange when the story you thought you knew turns out to be fiction. Yes, I agreed softly. It is. She studied me for a moment. You're different lately. More settled. I met an old friend of my mother's, I said, surprising myself with the disclosure. She gave me some perspective. Brooke nodded, not pushing for details. Well, it suits you. Leadership. It was the closest thing to a personal compliment she'd ever offered me. Progress, perhaps. Or just professional courtesy. After she left, I turned to the window, watching Charlotte's business district coming alive in the morning light. Below, people streamed into buildings, carrying coffee cups and briefcases, each focused on their own story, their own journey. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt completely present in my own skin. Not defined by rejection or validation, not driven by the need to prove my worth, but simply engaged in the work. I loved leading a company I believed in. Raymond Blake had given me biology, but Ellen Monroe had given me everything that mattered. Character, resilience, the capacity to succeed without sacrificing my humanity. As I turned back to my desk, my gaze fell on the small wooden box Raymond had given me during our last meeting. His father's first investment contract. I'd never opened it, never displayed it. Now, I carefully lifted the lid. Inside wasn't a contract at all, but a faded photograph. A young Raymond, perhaps 30, standing proudly in front of a small office with Blake Investments, freshly painted on the door. His expression was one of pure optimism, untainted by the compromises and calculations that would come later. Beneath the photo lay a handwritten note. The legacy is yours. Now, make it better than I did. I closed the box gently and set it aside. Not displayed prominently, but no longer hidden away. Just another piece of the complicated history that had brought me to this moment. Outside my office, Blake Holdings continued its daily rhythm. Phones ringing, meetings convening, decisions being made. My company now. My legacy to shape, not through revenge, but through excellence. 1 year to the day after that fateful shareholders meeting, I stood at the podium in the same boardroom, addressing a very different gathering. Our annual report showed record growth, client satisfaction at historic highs. A corporate culture transformed from hierarchical to collaborative. Blake Holdings has always been about investing in potential, I told the assembled executives, board members, and top clients. This year, we've proven that our greatest asset is our ability to evolve, to recognize opportunities even in the midst of challenge. The audience nodded appreciatively. Many had witnessed last year's drama. All had benefited from the company's subsequent renaissance. Today, I'm pleased to announce the launch of the Ellen Monroe Foundation, I continued, revealing the initiative I'd been developing for months. A $50 million commitment to support women entrepreneurs in the Southeast, providing not just capital, but mentorship, network access, and strategic guidance. Applause filled the room. I caught Linda's approving smile from the front row, Marcus's subtle thumbs up from the side. This foundation honors the woman who taught me that true success isn't measured by titles or wealth, but by integrity and positive impact, I explained. Each year, we'll select 20 ventures led by women who demonstrate exceptional promise and purpose. Our goal is nothing less than transforming the entrepreneurial landscape of our region. As the presentation concluded and guests mingled during the reception, I stepped away briefly for a moment of quiet reflection. The past year had been transformative, professionally triumphant, personally challenging, ultimately healing. Raymond had kept his word, maintaining complete separation from Blake Holdings. Occasionally, I spotted his name in business publications or charity event photos, always with a pang of complicated emotion that wasn't quite sadness, wasn't quite relief. Brooke had grown into a capable, increasingly confident executive, earning respect through diligence rather than family connection. Our relationship remained professional, occasionally warming during late-night strategy sessions or shared business victories, but never crossing into personal territory. Catherine Davenport had become an unexpected presence in my life, not replacing my mother, but offering a connection to her that I treasured. Through Catherine's stories, I came to know Ellen more fully, understanding the choices she'd made, the strength she'd demonstrated. Quite an achievement, a voice commented from behind me. I turned to find Richard Dawson, our senior board member, champagne flute in hand. The foundation, or surviving my first year as CEO? I asked with a small smile. Both, he acknowledged, though I was never concerned about the latter. The board made the right choice, even with all the drama that followed, especially because of how you handled it. He studied me thoughtfully. You know, when Raymond first brought you into senior leadership, some of us questioned his judgment. Not because of your abilities, those were evident, but because of his tendency toward impulsive decisions. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart quickened. How much did Richard know about my connection to Raymond? We didn't realize then that it might have been the wisest choice he ever made, Richard continued, creating his own successor. Someone who could take his vision but improve upon it, remove its flaws. You knew, I said quietly, about my relationship to Raymond? Richard smiled faintly. Board members notice patterns, Claire. Questions never quite answered. Similarities too distinct to be coincidental. Why didn't you say anything during the succession fight? Because it wasn't relevant to your qualifications, he replied simply. You earned your position through excellence, not biology. The board recognized that, even if Raymond temporarily forgot it. His words resonated deeply. Affirmation that my mother's strategy had succeeded. I had been judged on merit, not lineage. There's someone who'd like to speak with you, Richard added, gesturing toward the doorway. I suggested they wait until after the main event. I followed his gaze and froze. Raymond stood just inside the entrance, looking older, slightly thinner, but impeccably, dressed as always. Our eyes met across the room. He requested permission to attend, Richard explained. Board approved it, but left the final decision to you. I can have security escort him out if you prefer. I considered it for a moment, then shook my head. No, it's fine. As I approached Raymond, the room seemed to quiet, executives and board members watching with barely concealed curiosity. Congratulations, he said when I reached him. The foundation is a wonderful initiative. Thank you. I maintained professional composure, aware of our audience. I'm surprised to see you here. I asked to come. He glanced around the familiar boardroom. I wanted to see what you've built, how you've transformed things. An awkward silence stretched between us. And? I finally prompted. It's impressive, he admitted. More than I imagined possible. The quarterly results speak for themselves. I nodded, accepting the professional compliment. The Ellen Monroe Foundation, he continued, something softening in his expression. She would be proud. The mention of my mother's name from his lips caught me off guard. You can't know that. I knew her better than you might think, Claire. A flash of old pain crossed his face. She was the most principled person I ever met. Too principled for me, as it turned out. I thought of my mother's journal, her complex feelings for this man who had loved her briefly but lacked the courage to choose her. I met Catherine Davenport, I said. She gave me my mother's diary. He stilled. I see. I know you visited my mother before she died. That you wanted to acknowledge me then. He nodded slowly. She was right to refuse. You needed to make your own way. Another silence fell, heavier this time. I don't expect forgiveness, he finally said. What I did at that shareholders meeting and after was unforgivable. But I wanted you to know that I recognize the truth now. Which truth? That you were always the best choice to lead this company. That your mother raised an extraordinary daughter. That my greatest contribution to Blake Holdings might have been simply creating the opportunity for you to transform it. His sincerity seemed genuine, not calculated, not strategic, but the hard-won perspective of a man facing his failures honestly. The foundation will need advisors, I said, surprising myself. Experienced investors who understand how to nurture new businesses. He looked startled by the implied offer. I would be honored to contribute, in whatever capacity you deem appropriate. As a consultant, I clarified. Independent, external. The foundation remains under my direction. Of course. He accepted the limitations without hesitation. As he turned to leave, he paused. One more thing. I've amended my will. My personal assets, separate from anything related to Blake Holdings, will be divided equally between you and Brooke. It's not an attempt to buy forgiveness, just a small correction to a very old wrong. I didn't know how to respond to this unexpected gesture. I don't need your money, Raymond. I know. That's why I'm comfortable leaving it to you. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You're the only one who would use it wisely. After he left, I rejoined the reception, answering questions about the foundation, discussing implementation strategies with the team we'd assembled. If anyone noticed my brief conversation with Raymond, they were professional enough not to mention it. Later that evening, I returned to my office to collect my things. The building was quiet, most employees gone. I stood at the window, watching Charlotte's lights shimmer against the darkening sky. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Ellen would be bursting with pride today. Not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you've become. I smiled, tucking the phone away. My journey wasn't about Raymond Blake anymore, neither proving myself to him, nor defining myself against him. It was about honoring my mother's legacy while creating my own. On my desk sat a framed photograph, Ellen and me at my college graduation, her arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming. Next to it, the wooden box containing Raymond's first business photograph. Not hidden, not displayed prominently, just acknowledged as part of the complex history that had shaped me. As I gathered my coat and briefcase, Brooke appeared in my doorway. The foundation launch went well, she said. The initial applications are already coming in. Good. We'll need a strong selection committee. I studied her for a moment. Would you be interested in serving on it? She looked surprised by the invitation. Really? You've shown good judgment this past year, and perspective that would be valuable. She considered this, then nodded. I'd like that. As we walked toward the elevator together, she asked hesitantly, I saw my father here earlier. How was that? Complicated, I admitted, but not as difficult as I expected. The elevator arrived and we stepped inside. Do you think people can really change? She asked as the doors closed. Fundamentally, I mean. I thought about Raymond's journey from ambitious young entrepreneur to ruthless CEO to the humbled man I'd seen today. About my own evolution from driven executive to vindicated successor to secure leader. I think people can grow, I replied carefully, recognize their mistakes, choose different paths forward. I'd like to believe that, she said quietly. We reached the lobby and stepped out into the evening air. Charlotte's business district hummed, with end-of-day energy, professionals heading home, restaurants filling, lights coming on in apartment buildings. Good night, Claire, Brooke said, turning toward the parking garage. Good night, I replied, watching her walk away. Not quite family, not quite friend, but something unique that we were still defining. I took a different path, heading toward the park where I often walked before, driving home. The spring evening was perfect, warm but not hot, fragrant with flowering trees, alive with the sounds of a city transitioning from work to life. As I walked, I thought about the question Brooke had asked. Could people fundamentally change? Perhaps not, but they could heal, they could learn, they could choose integrity even after failures. Raymond would never be the father I'd imagined as a child. Brooke would never be the sister I might have had under different circumstances. Blake Holdings would always carry a name that wasn't mine. Yet somehow, I had found peace with all of it. Not through revenge or retaliation, but through building something meaningful from the materials life had given me. Through choosing dignity over bitterness. Through recognizing that the strongest legacy isn't built on a name, but on values that endure. My mother had understood this all along. In protecting me from the truth about Raymond, she hadn't been denying me my heritage. She'd been giving me the freedom to create my own. As darkness fell completely and Charlotte's skyline lit up against the night sky, I paused to take in the view. Somewhere in that glittering landscape stood Blake Holdings, my company now, my vision shaping its future. Not because I was Raymond Blake's daughter, but because I was Ellen Monroe's, and most importantly, because I was Claire, defined not by blood or birthright, but by the choices I made, the values I upheld, and the legacy I was still writing. Every day, in my own name,